presented by Outriders. Welcome back to Next Gen Console Watch, our show following all the news on the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X and its games. I'm Damon Hatfield, and joining me as always are Jonathan Dornbush, host of IGN's PlayStation Podcast Beyond.
Beyond. Hey, Damon.
Hello there. And Ryan McCaffrey, host of IGN's Xbox Podcast Unlocked.
Happy spring, Damon.
Happy spring to you as well. This week, we got a lot of updates on Cyberpunk 2077 and the studio, CD Projekt Red, what its future plans are for Cyberpunk and The Witcher. So let's begin right there. We learned this week that future Witcher and Cyberpunk games will be developed simultaneously by CD Projekt Red starting 2022. So I guess the first question, Ryan, we'll start off with you. Does that fill you with confidence, given the state that Cyberpunk, after a long development period, the state that it launched in? Are you confident in the studio's ability to produce the next Cyberpunk game and the next Witcher game at the same time?
Well, inevitably, they're going to have to push and pull a little bit. I talked to Valve when I was up there just before the pandemic for Half-Life Alyx, and they were talking about how at one point they had... It was sort of, oh, that's right. It was a story of how the Orange Box came together, of how they had all these little projects that ultimately needed to be pulled together, and they chose to put them into one thing. And resources have to go to certain places at certain times. So yeah, I'm sure there'll be kind of a push and pull at times, but I think ultimately this comes down to them not wanting to put all their eggs in one basket, lest the worst possible thing happen, which is what they did to themselves this time. Because I mean, I know we've seen press releases and announcements that they've sold a few million copies or what have you, but I would have to imagine that they have not made anywhere near as much money thus far off of Cyberpunk 2077 as they thought they would. And of course they had, as you said, it's like 7 years of development, all these eggs in one basket, and the game's not even available on the PlayStation Store. It hasn't been for like 3 months. So, you know, they are probably really taking a serious hard look at de-riskifying their future and not, you know, be left in a situation where if the worst happened, that they'd suddenly have, you know, all this overhead, all these developers, and, you know, if something doesn't live up to expectations for whatever reason, then they're kind of left high and dry. So I totally get the diversification strategy here.
Jonathan, what was your reaction to this news?
My reaction more than anything was that this was a, hey, don't worry, we're also working on that franchise we're known for and is beloved, and didn't have the launch that Cyberpunk had as well. Because obviously, I think even with this long tail that we've had for Cyberpunk, I think so many people have wondered what's next for The Witcher besides Gwent. And so to say that they're working on both sort of in perpetuity, that they're going to be working on both simultaneously in 2022, to Ryan's point, like these are not going to be games that are going to be simultaneously made at the exact same points of development. They're not going to release these at the same time. Like there will be some staggered nature to their development, and they'll probably push and pull and give and take from each of the teams as necessary. But I think it's sort of an assurance to fans more than anything that both of these franchises matter to the future of CD Projekt Red, especially if you were put off by what happened with Cyberpunk at launch.
A lot of people thought that maybe the next AAA thing from CD Projekt Red would be the Cyberpunk multiplayer game, either a sort of a companion piece to 2077 like GTA Online, or a completely different thing. But now apparently plans for that have changed. That could be canceled or delayed. The quote from I think it was an update to investors this week. The quote from CD Projekt Red reads, "Previously we hinted that our next AAA would be a multiplayer Cyberpunk game. But we have decided to reconsider this plan given our new, more systemic and agile approach. Instead of primarily focusing on one big online experience or game, we are focusing on bringing online into all of our franchises one day." Along with developing Cyberpunk and The Witcher games simultaneously, Ryan, does this sound like they're going to implement similar multiplayer features that can just sort of be like dropped into both games and adjusted for their settings?
Yeah, it sounds to me like they're just kind of rethinking their online strategy. That they're said, okay, we will be doing online stuff with our games moving forward, but again, I think it comes back to them not wanting to put all these eggs in one basket of Cyberpunk, which is that is a basket covered in now smelly, rotten, broken eggs at this point. So, you know, if do they really want to spend another 2-3 years doing a GTA Online like, long tail thing that I'm sure they had grand dreams that would make them just endless money in the way that GTA Online has for Rockstar, and they've realized that, well, maybe the damage here is pretty significant, and maybe we should just kind of rethink our online strategy and not abandon it, but maybe not just channel it all into this one big significant thing.
Jonathan, it's been over 100 days since Cyberpunk was removed from the PlayStation Store. CD Projekt says it could be coming back soon, but that decision is ultimately up to Sony. Do you have any sort of idea of when to expect Cyberpunk back in the PlayStation Store?
Nothing that I can report here. It's one of those things that I don't think Sony's probably in any rush to put it back on the store. To me, it seems like they're going to hold out until they feel like it is most responsible to, because at the end of the day, they don't want to be put in a place where they have to possibly give refunds again. Even if the game, we saw the 1.2 patch this week, we'll continue to see more patches, even if it's in a better state than when they first pulled it. I think they probably want to make sure everything is buttoned up, everything is absolutely sure. So I would be more inclined to say it's going to be a little longer than, in the next couple of weeks or anything. This is Sony, so who knows? Me saying this, they'll probably put it up in between when we record and when this episode goes live. But it's one of those things that I could see it taking a couple more months to get there.
The last bit of CD Projekt Red news that we got this week was that they confirmed the next-gen or PS5, Xbox Series X version of The Witcher 3 will be arriving in the back half of the year, which I think is also when we expect the next-gen version of Cyberpunk 2077. So interesting to have both of those drop within the same 6-month window. Personally, I think I would like to revisit The Witcher 3 on one of my current gen systems, because that was already a beautiful game. I would love to see what a true next gen version looks. Ryan, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is still on schedule. I believe they'd always said this 2021 for this, and obviously we had hoped to get the proper next gen update for Cyberpunk sooner than this, but it really serves as a convenient phase 1 of CD Projekt Red's image rehabilitation, where they can go, look, here's a free update that makes the game you already love even better. But no, it's a good thing. I mean, I don't mean to keep kind of kicking them while they're down. I mean, this is a great thing. They are under zero obligation to update a now going on 6-year-old game. It was IGN's 2015 Game of the Year. So I mean, there's a business incentive for them for sure, because they can introduce this to a new generation of fans and sell some more copies and sell some more expansion packs like Blood and Wine, which, the 2 expansions were great. So there's definitely a good reason for them to do it, but it's great of them to do this and offer this as an update for players who already own it.
Yeah. I've really been enjoying, in the absence of a lot of new games to play on my new consoles, I like this sort of steady stream of updated versions of older games that I haven't played in a while. It's been really nice to revisit them in the best looking way possible. Of course, on this show, we spend most of our time talking about these brand new consoles, PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X. But now we're going to talk about some of the older Sony consoles, PlayStation 3, PSP, and the Vita. Jonathan, we've been hearing for a while that the stores on those systems would be shutting down, and this week we got confirmation from Sony that will be happening this summer. So it's easy to sort of dismiss that as these are old consoles you can't buy anymore. How many people are really trying to actively use those stores? Does Sony need to keep maintaining those stores going forward? But there is the argument to be made that there are games that you can only buy today digitally through those stores, like PlayStation 1 and some PS2 games. So from that perspective, I think it's kind of a bummer. Jonathan, what's your take on it?
Oh yeah, bummer, I think is a good way to phrase it. Last week on Podcast Beyond, we were talking about it when the rumors first popped up, and I think Brian Altano put it succinctly in just saying, it just sucks. It's an unfortunate major part of PlayStation's legacy, and the PS3 in particular is this fascinating time where they started at this huge hubristic moment and sort of had this fall from grace with the launch of the PS3. But that's also when they solidified a lot of their first party stable and what studios like Naughty Dog and Sucker Punch could do in a third person action sort of genre. And so there's a lot of history there. There's stuff like Metal Gear Solid 4 that is only available on the PlayStation 3. There's interesting aspects like that. And then you look at things like the Vita and PSP were a ton of first-party Sony spin-offs were lived there but haven't really had a life anywhere else. And the Vita was this huge indie home before the Switch. In between the Xbox and the Switch, the Vita was kind of the place to go for indies. And it's this unfortunate bummer where, yes, there were a lot of things that were cross-play and a lot of things did end up on PS4, but this is such a major part of Sony's history that they're making the active decision to say goodbye to. It's one of those things where we don't have a solution to where that part of history can go. And, the thing with art that we talked about a lot on Podcast Beyond is, yes, things will always be lost to time. There are films and TV shows, pieces of art, pieces of music that we just can't find anywhere anymore. And that is going to happen with gaming. But this is a thing where a major platform holder is just making this decision without saying, but we're going to, back everything up with X, Y, or Z video game history organization. And I think that's the frustrating thing, is that they're the ones making the decision and there's no alternative to let people who do want that history at some point in the future be able to access it easily.
Yeah, I mean, I would hope Sony has some sort of plan to make those games available in the future. I would absolutely pay $10 to download Einhander on my PlayStation 5 or Bushido Blade or Rival Schools. Do you have any idea of what Sony might be planning to do with these older games?
Nothing at the moment. My best guess would be PlayStation Now, because there are PS2 and PS3 games on PlayStation Now. It's by no means a full library or anything of the like, but that is the current home for where you can get older PlayStation games and play them on a PS4 or PS5. I was really shocked. I thought there would sort of be a sort of 1-2 punch of, hey, we're unfortunately letting these stores die, but we're going to bolster and add hundreds of games to the PS Now library of some kind. It's one of those things where I think, if there is a hope for those games to survive, and it's a very big if, I think PlayStation Now is the place to look to, but that service also is in a strange place where Sony doesn't seem to be doing as much with it as they could. So I'm not necessarily the most hopeful, but that would be, to me, the most likely place to look.
Ryan, we've talked a lot about how Xbox seems to be taking the polar opposite approach to its back catalog, going to great lengths to make sure as much of its back catalog is playable across its entire ecosystem of Xboxes. And what we just found out today, that they're adding, I think, 16 of those older games to xCloud. Is that right? Games like Banjo-Kazooie, Banjo-Tooie, Fable 2, Fallout New Vegas.
Sorry, Damon. Yeah, I was just busy playing Oblivion on my phone, which just got added to xCloud today. A game that's been backwards compatible for years now playable in an entirely new way. Now still waiting on the iOS this spring, but we'll get there. But yeah, no, you're totally right. It's just crazy to see that the fork in the road here, as similar as these two new consoles are on paper in a lot of ways. Yeah, they are the policies and the philosophies have been very different, and Sony has been taking a very clear, very distinct view that the past doesn't matter to them, or at least it doesn't matter enough to invest the resources in the way that Microsoft has. Now, I know the cynical fanboy way to look at that would be, well, Sony has good stuff now, they don't need to worry about then, and Microsoft doesn't have good stuff now, so they need to, focus on the past. But the reality is that those are not mutually exclusive things, that Microsoft will be having many good things in the now and in the future as all these studios start spitting out games. And then they'll also have this incredible legacy of backward compatibility and game preservation. And it is a shame that Sony is not coming along for the ride. I mean, I suspect part of it is technical in that, Microsoft has been kind of x86 based for a long time, which has made compatibility easier. I mean, I'm not a programmer or a game developer, so I don't, can't really explain that fully, but I do know that Microsoft has had a more PC-like architecture to their consoles since the original Xbox, whereas Sony has used, very proprietary stuff each time up until the PS4, which is an x86 based device. So it's a mix of all of it. But the bottom line is, it is a shame that Sony is kind of not currently supporting the past, and Microsoft really deserves a lot of credit for continuing to bring the past into the present in, if you want it or not, it's there for you.
Sure. And it's not just Sony who's sort of, leaving a lot of these games behind. Nintendo's doing the same thing. Nintendo is also, in the past, they had the Virtual Console, which was amazing, and they yanked that away from us not too long ago. I would love to be able to I just dream of a future where on any of the platforms you can access older games. I'm happy to pay for them. It's just important to be able to have access and that these games aren't lost to time. But speaking of Nintendo, before we go, we have the results of last week's poll. We asked, would you be interested in a more powerful or expensive Switch Pro? And 40% of you said maybe. It'll depend on how good the improvements are. So take a wait and see approach. That's smart. About 16% of you said you have no interest in a Switch Pro at all. We have a new poll for you to vote on for next week. We want to know, what would you rather get sooner? Talking about future Cyberpunk games and stuff from CD Projekt Red. Would you rather get a GTA Online style open world Cyberpunk multiplayer game, or The Witcher 4, or an all new Cyberpunk game, or something entirely new from CD Projekt Red? Make sure to vote at IGN.com and we'll share the results with you next week. And that's going to do it for this edition of Next Gen Console Watch 2020. Thank you to both Ryan and Jonathan. We'll be back next Friday, 6 a.m. Pacific, 9 a.m. Eastern. Yes, that's correct. With more Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5 news. We'll see you then.